Before we start, take a moment to like and subscribe. How could a boy born to a quiet traditional farming family rise to become a godlike emperor? A man who promised his people a communist utopia and in a terrifying twist delivered a nightmare of blood and famine. What happens when a revolutionary leader, after winning the hearts of a nation, turns his genius mind for manipulation inward, unleashing chaos on his own people to solidify his power? His life began with a striking irony. Born in 1893 in the rural village of Shoshan, Hunan Province, Mao was not the downtrodden peasant he would later romanticize. His father was a prosperous farmer who owned his own land, a patriarch who demanded obedience and a strict adherence to tradition. Young Mao, however, was a stubborn and rebellious son. A boy who devoured every book he could find and openly defied his father's authority. This early rebellion against a powerful paternal figure would become a defining theme of his entire life, a pattern he would repeat on a national scale. He was an intellectual from a world of manual labor, often escaping to the local library to read classics that were far removed from the practicalities of farm life. Mao's thirst for knowledge took him to the vibrant, chaotic cities of Changsha and Beijing. He was a student during a period of intense political and social upheaval in China. The ancient empire had crumbled, foreign powers had carved the country into spheres of influence, and a deep-seated humiliation festered in the national consciousness. Mao found himself in the heart of the May 4th movement, a fiery explosion of anti-imperialist and cultural protest. It was here that he was first exposed to the works of Karl Marx and Lenin, but he was not a simple disciple. Unlike many of his contemporaries who looked to the urban proletariat for revolution, Mao saw a different path. His great insight, a strategic twist of fate, was to see the revolutionary potential not in the industrial workers of the cities, but in the vast, untapped power of the rural peasants he had grown up with. He believed their sheer numbers and raw, uncorrupted spirit were the true engine of revolution. The early years of the Chinese Communist Party were a desperate struggle. From 1927 onward, we were locked in a brutal civil war with the more powerful and better-equipped Nationalist Party Kuomintang, led by Chiang Kai-shek. The Nationalists launched a series of encirclement campaigns, ruthlessly hunting down the Communists. In 1934, Mao's army was on the brink of total annihilation. They were forced to abandon their base and embark on a desperate, death-defying retreat. This was the start of the Long March. For 370 days, over 80,000 soldiers embarked on an epic journey, trekking over 6,000 miles through some of China's most unforgiving terrain. They crossed treacherous rivers, scaled snowy mountain peaks, and navigated vast uninhabitable marshlands, all while fighting off the relentless nationalist forces. The human toll was staggering. Thousands froze to death in the mountains. Many more starved, and constant skirmishes with the nationalists thinned their ranks daily. By the time they reached safety in northern China, only a fraction of the original army remained, fewer than 8,000 men. A military defeat of such staggering proportions should have spelled the end of the Chinese Communist Party. But in a stunning twist, Mao masterfully reframed this desperate military retreat as a glorious journey of endurance and ideological purity. The Long March became the central myth of the Communist Revolution, a legend that solidified Mao's leadership and inspired a generation. It was a testament to his ability to not only lead an army, but to also control the narrative of his own history, transforming failure into a powerful and enduring symbol of sacrifice. In 1949, after years of renewed civil war and the chaos of World War II, Mao Zedong stood atop the gate of the Forbidden City in Beijing and declared the founding of the People's Republic of China. He was a hero, a liberator, and the most powerful man in the nation. The people, after decades of war and suffering, believed a new golden age was upon them. The land was redistributed, a sense of national pride was restored, and China seemed poised to enter an era of peace and prosperity. But the peace was a fleeting illusion, a prelude to a terrifying new chapter. After consolidating his power and eliminating his rivals, Mao felt a new threat rising: the intellectual class and bureaucracy he saw as an impediment to his grand vision. In 1956, he launched a campaign that promised unprecedented freedom of speech. The 100 Flowers campaign invited intellectuals and critics to let 100 flowers bloom and 100 schools of thought contend by openly criticizing the Communist Party. The response was a flood of criticism, with people airing grievances about corruption, the lack of democracy, and the party's oppressive tactics. It was a trap, a chilling and deliberate act of betrayal. As soon as the criticism reached a fever pitch, Mao abruptly ended the campaign and launched the anti-rightist movement, punishing those who had spoken out against him. Hundreds of thousands were purged, sent to labor camps, or executed, a clear message that dissent would not be tolerated. The campaign became a brutal tool to identify and neutralize anyone who might dare to challenge his absolute authority. Mao's vision for China was a bizarre mix of idealism and delusion. He believed China could bypass the traditional stages of industrialization and leapfrog into communism, becoming a global superpower overnight. In 1958, he launched the Great Leap Forward, a plan to rapidly transform China's agrarian economy into a modern communist society. Private farming was abolished in favor of vast communes, and millions of peasants were diverted from farming to build massive infrastructure projects or to work in backyard steel furnaces. A national crusade to produce steel and prove China's industrial might. The results were catastrophic. The backyard furnaces produced useless, low-quality metal that was largely unusable. And the mass mobilization of the peasantry led to a devastating drop in agricultural production. Worse still, local officials, terrified of Mao's purges, began to wildly inflate crop yields. A tragic act of deception that led the government to believe there was a surplus of grain. In reality, the nation was on the brink of starvation. A great famine followed, the largest man-made disaster in human history. Between 1958 and 1962, it is estimated that anywhere from 15 to 45 million people died of starvation. This was the most horrific plot twist of all, a catastrophic human disaster born out of a utopian vision. The great helmsman, the man who had promised to save his people, had accidentally plunged them into a hell of his own making. After the disaster of the Great Leap Forward, Mao's power began to wane. He was sidelined within the party, his authority challenged by more pragmatic leaders like Deng Xiaoping. In 1966, an old, frail, and paranoid Mao launched his final, most audacious power play. This was the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, a movement that, on the surface, sought to purge the party of bourgeois elements and return the revolution to its pure ideological roots. In reality, it was a ruthless and brilliant tactic to destroy his political rivals and reclaim absolute power. He encouraged the nation's youth to form groups called Red Guards. He told them to bombard the headquarters, giving them a free pass to terrorize anyone they deemed to be a capitalist roader. The result was utter chaos. The Red Guards roamed the country, destroying temples, museums, and historical artifacts. They publicly humiliated and tortured teachers, officials, and anyone with a background that was deemed suspicious. The Red Guards turned on their own parents and denounced their own families in a bizarre and terrifying spectacle of ideological fervor. The Cultural Revolution devolved into a spiral of factional violence and civil war as rival Red Guard groups battled for power. The very foundations of Chinese society were shattered, and millions of lives were ruined. The country was plunged into a state of brutal anarchy, all in the service of one man's obsession with control. By the early 1970s, Mao's health was in rapid decline. The chaos he had unleashed was finally beginning to slow down, but the country was left in ruins, spent his final years as a revered but ailing figure, a myth more than a man. The great helmsman who had steered China for decades was now a spectator to the power struggles of his allies and rivals. He died on September 9, 1976, The man who had been the source of so much suffering was given a grand funeral, and the entire nation mourned his passing. His body was embalmed and put on display, a final ironic act of deification. Mao's legacy is a riddle. He is remembered as both the father of modern China, a man who unified the country and ended a century of humiliation, and as a mass murderer, the architect of a man-made famine and a revolution that tore families apart. His story is a chilling reminder of the paradox of power. How a charismatic leader's vision for a better future can be twisted into a terrifying tool of destruction, and how a nation can be convinced to tear itself apart in the name of progress.